Like probably many of you in the audience, I first encountered Maggie O'Farrell quite a few years ago, when I stumbled across her debut novel, After You'd Gone. That novel went on to win the Betty Trask Award, and subsequently she won the Somerset Maugham for Distance Between Us and the Costa Award for The Hand That First Held Mine. Staggeringly and utterly wrongly, in my opinion, Instructions on a Heatwave, which was absolutely my favourite by far, didn't win a single award. That was clearly stupid. But happily, readers know much better than awards judges, and I say that as someone who has judged awards. I can tell you, we don't know very much. And it went on to be a massive bestseller. And that's a fate that I confidently predict for her 7th novel, which I hope you've all either got or planning to get before the end of the evening. This will be the place. Please welcome my literary and hair crush, Maggie O'Farrell. As you could tell, This Must Be the Place has all the wonderful Maggie O'Farrell storytelling that you'd expect. But there's also structurally, there's so much more going on. It's multiple viewpoints, 30 years, 3 continents, 21 time zones, and absolutely no chronology whatsoever. And the other thing about it is that you never even, and this is a really, and we'll come back to this later, but you never even consider, I never even considered whether this book was written by a man or a woman. And I think that that is unusual for a publisher to let you do that. Did you intentionally want to make a leap with this book?
I don't know if it felt like a leap. I think a lot of books are a reaction to their predecessor. And the book I wrote before this, Instructions for a Heatwave, had a very kind of strict technical boundaries. It had to happen over 4 days, and it had to be in the voices of 4 people, and it had 2 very quite hermetic, claustrophobic locations. At the end of it, I just had this, I don't know what it was like a sensation. I mean, I've never worn a corset, I should preface that by saying, but it felt a little bit like ripping it off and thinking, now I can do anything. And I really had this urge to do something, just to kind of rip up the rule book in a way and do something completely different and very unfettered. I wanted to think of new ways to tell a narrative, and to try and tell, because actually the story is really about the marriage between Daniel, who you met there, and Claudette, the actress who he falls in love with and they marry. The book is mostly about, I mean, their marriage is at the centre of it, the story of their marriage, but I wanted to tell it from lots of different points of view, from their children, their stepchildren, their employees, friends, relatives, people they meet only for a minute, sort of lots of people whose lives intersect with theirs. So I wanted to kind of deconstruct and see what the novel could be capable of as in a sort of medium of its own.
Are you a planner then? Because this book it's like a big, sprawling but very intricate mind map. So did that take a lot of planning?
Well, I mean, I'm not really a planner in life, actually, or in fiction, I have to say. And I know there are writers who will plan everything very meticulously, and each chapter will have a sort of a shape to it before they even start, but I'm really not like that. So I started with the idea of this American guy arriving in rural Ireland and meeting this woman, and sort of after that I didn't really know what was going to happen. But I did, I mean, about sort of a third, well maybe not even, about a quarter of the way in, I did think, you know, actually this book is going to be big and it's going to be very complicated, and I am going to need to plan more than I have done before. So I went out and I bought an enormous pinboard. It was huge, the ocean liner of pinboards, and lots of different coloured post-it notes, and you can tell I really love stationery in this story. Each character had its own colour, and I would sort of move them around, and the whole thing was enormous, and every morning I would stand in front of it and I would sort of think, well, maybe that chapter, what would happen to the sort of domino effect of the book if I moved that chapter here, and if the chronology is overarching, is it too, you know, and I would sort of spend ages looking at it. When I was cleaning my teeth in the bathroom, and my youngest child, who was a toddler at the time, she was probably about 1.5, she came into the bathroom with that little kind of drunken sailor walk that they have at that age, and she was saying, all gone, all gone. And I said, what's all gone? And she opened up her hand, and she had this huge ball of slightly masticated, because she had chewed it, coloured paper. And she kind of handed it to me, and I realised that she had just climbed onto my desk and pulled down every single one. So yeah, so I quite literally lost the plot that morning. The whole thing was gone.
And to talk about the chapter, which is everybody's favourite chapter that I know, the chapter where the auction catalogue of Claudette's possessions. What was the inspiration for that?
It's that sense of you can look straight at a narrative, or you can step to the side and try and look at it at a different, more oblique angle. And that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to find a kind of new way to tell a story, tell a narrative, or give an angle on somebody's life. Because I do think that, you know, as human beings, we're very, very complicated, very nuanced. You know, I don't think our memories and our personalities are neat, ordered and chronological and have one viewpoint and story. I think we're much more complicated than that, and I think we're much more layered human beings, and I think there's no one way to tell one story. There are 100 ways to tell it. And so I was thinking about Claudette and the idea of her leaving and running away, and what it would have been like to be left behind. You know, what would her house have looked like? I mean, she genuinely just walks out of her life one day and runs away and hides away in Ireland. And I was thinking about all the things she'd left behind, and one of my friends is an auctioneer, and I was asking him about it one day, because I said, and he said, and I said, can you show me some of your catalogues? And I was looking at them all, and I was saying to him, I don't get it. I don't understand why anybody would pay this amount of money to, you know, own, I don't know, Elvis's shirt, or I didn't really understand that. And he said, okay, I'm going to show you something. And he showed me, it was in a kind of cotton, I had to put on white cotton gloves to handle it, but it was a letter from Charlotte Bronte. And it was obviously a kind of reply to a fan. It was sort of doctor somebody, and she'd written saying, thank you so much, I'm so glad you enjoyed Jane Eyre, blah, blah, blah. And I was holding it, and I suddenly, and he said to me, do you get it now? And I said, yes, I do get it, I do. And if I'd had 20 grand in my pocket, I would have handed it over to him there and then. But it was amazing, I could actually run my fingers over the ink of her signature. And there is that sense that it's a kind of collapsing down between you and this other person who you revere or you admire. You know, you can almost feel them as if they're in the room with you if you hold something that they touched. And I did think, you know, if she left, if she was as famous as I say she is in the book, people would want her stuff, they'd want her things, and maybe that's a way to tell the story.
I think as well it's about a little bit of owning a little bit of a person, isn't it? And as well as being predominantly a story about a marriage and the journey that marriage goes on, but it's also, I mean, there are many, many things, but one of those things is the curse of modern celebrity. Were you inspired by anyone in particular or any particular events?
Well, it's funny, I had the idea of a Claudette story quite a long time ago. It was the first piece of the book that fell into place for me. And it was when my middle daughter was really young, so it was about 7 years ago. And she was tiny, I mean, she was probably about 3 weeks old, maybe 4 weeks old. I had her in the sling, and I was in Soho, and I'd gone into a cafe to have a cup of tea, and I was thinking, as I was sitting there, I thought, there's a really odd atmosphere in this room, but I couldn't quite work out what it was. And then it suddenly hit me that opposite me at this trestle table, about as close as you are to me now, was this incredibly famous actress. I mean, so famous that she would have been known anywhere. Her face was recognisable anywhere in the world. And she was right there, sitting in front of me, which was a really odd experience, because somebody who's that famous is so familiar to you, it's almost as if you think, oh, there's my friend.
Yeah,
you think, oh, no, it's not my friend. It's somebody really famous. But she looked absolutely miserable. I mean, you know, if she hadn't been who she was, I would have said to her, are you okay? Do you need some help? Can I do something for you? And at one point, I was walking to the ladies, and she was a couple of steps ahead of me, and it was sort of walking in her slipstream that I got a kind of just a whiff or a sense of what it must be like to be her. And it was just an absolutely horrific glimpse into her life, because everybody in the room was staring at her and taking photographs on their phone. She was heavily pregnant, which I think is why she was being hounded. And outside the window were a huge bank of paparazzi all taking a photograph and banging on the window and shouting her name. And when I got to the ladies, she just had her head leaning into the mirror with her eyes closed, and she was obviously just taking a moment. She was in this tiny ladies' loo on her own. She just had a moment to kind of try to gather herself. And I just thought, we left the cafe, and as I was walking, I had to kind of fight my way through these horrible photographers. And I thought, God, if I was her, I would fake my own death and I would run away as far as I could go. And I took a few more steps, and I thought, that's a good idea for a novel. So I kind of stored it away, and it sort of bubbled away for several years, and then came out in this book.
I'm obviously desperately trying to work out which really famous celebrity was pregnant 7 years ago now.
Well, I feel it would be wrong to say, because partly because it's a sad story, I think, and also it's a story about privacy. And I think if I did say who it was, I'd be just like the photographers outside. It wouldn't be. I would be joining their sort of prurient ranks in a way.
I'm sorry, once a journalist, always.
I know. No, I understand.
Can't
completely.
help myself. Have to know. But I think you beautifully capture that kind of, I don't know, third-person life in the novel. And there's a scene with where Claudette's on the film set, and they're all talking about her as if she's not there. It's like, she's coming, she's stopped, she's moving. And you capture that beautifully, that sense that she's not present.
Yeah.
That even though she's just walking through it.
Yeah.
And as a journalist, you experience that a lot with celebrities, where there are all those people around them who are meant to, and probably do, make their lives easier, but they're kind of the product.
Well, I had a friend who worked on a film set, and it was his job to basically follow the lead actor and narrate into a headset what they were doing. And I was saying, that's the weirdest job I've ever heard. And I said, do you ever talk to him? And he said, oh my God, no, we don't talk to him. I said, what, you walk behind him talking about him but never to him? And he said, no, we don't even look at him. And I was thinking, and I think I could tell he was thinking I was a bit odd, because I was saying, no, hang on a minute, you never speak to him, you never look at him. And he said, no. And I said, what if he needs a drink? He said, well, he doesn't ask me, he asks, he
asks the drink guy.
the drink person. I just thought, what a hideous idea, this person who's just behind you yattering on about what you're doing.
I wasn't going to ask you this until we had a conversation just upstairs, but so you have never drunk. Sorry, you just gave me this earlier, so I have to say it. Not for any sinister reason, but you've just never drunk.
No.
So how did you write The Alcoholic? I don't mean you have to be an alcoholic to write that, obviously,
sure.
But, you know.
I don't know really. I mean, I don't think it's that big an act of ventriloquism. I think you can imagine what it would be like. You know, I've had friends who've had, maybe drunk too much than they should to it sometimes, and it's something I've witnessed in other people. But yeah, it doesn't feel to me a huge leap of ventriloquism to be able to write that. You can imagine what it would be like.
You've watched it plenty.
I suppose so. Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't say no one close to me is an alcoholic. Certainly not my husband. No. I should mention.
Yeah.
It's not
Poor
here
Will.
to defend himself. Yeah, exactly. But no, I've seen enough of it to imagine what it must be like, what it would do to your family if you went down that road.
One of the most moving relationships in the book is Daniel's relationship with his son, Niall. Niall has chronic eczema, and you have personal experience of that, don't you? Well,
yeah, one of my children was born with chronic eczema and still has it, and I think it was kind of inevitable in a way, that I think something that was taking up so much of my time and sort of mental space would sort of filter into the book. But also, actually, one of the reasons I really wanted to write a character with eczema is that, I mean, I suppose for the two reasons in a way. I think the book is about people who are uncomfortable in their skin, who they find their lives or their situation unlivable, like Claudette, who runs away, or Daniel, whose marriage breaks down. And I suppose Niall is a sort of literal representation of that actually his skin is quite literally unlivable. But also, actually, what I always find that in fiction, that there are whenever you meet a character who has either eczema or asthma or allergies, it's always treated as a kind of comedy. It's always kind of comedic device, and the person is always presented as kind of a weakling, as a bit sort of pathetic. And it was, for obvious reasons, this makes me really mad because, if you have a child like that, you know that these kids are the essence of stoicism. They are the toughest of the whole crowd. They can put up with, they have to. They don't have any choice to put up with all this physical torture and discomfort. So it makes me really cross. And I thought, actually, I'm going to write a character who has eczema but is incredibly strong. And actually, Niall's the sort of emotional centre of the book. He's the one that everybody, actually, at the end of anyway, connects to. He holds everybody together. So it was, and actually there was also one day, the really good thing about writing books is that you can live out all the things that annoy you or make you happy, you can live them out in your book. And there was one day I was sitting in, my daughter had to go to a sort of day clinic to get herself bandaged when she's really bad. We were sitting in this clinic, which we spend a huge amount of time in. And, and we were sitting there for ages because you always have to wait. And there was a huge sort of bank of advertisements on the wall that were all for children who have eczema. So lots of the sort of silk balaclavas that you have to wear, or the pyjamas that have got closed ends, or underwear with no elastic in them, all this kind of stuff that you need every day. But every single child in these photographs had this beautiful kind of white alabaster skin, and they were kind of grinning as they wore these kind of pediatric straitjackets. And I just thought, why am I being made to look at this? Why are we being sold this? Are they saying to us that our children, even though they have eczema, but we think they're beautiful, but they're not beautiful enough to be in the adverts for the stuff that they need? It made me so cross. So I went home, I cycled home, I really crossly cycled home with my daughter who had been bandaged and was much more comfortable. And so I wrote the scene where Daniel, also sitting in a clinic like this, he gets out his red marker pen and draws in the eczema on all the adverts, which I would have done actually, but my penmanship is so bad it would have just looked like some random graffiti. So yeah, you can live out your own sort of, furies. You can visit your furies upon the fiction.
Let's talk a little bit about your writing. So this is your 7th book, and from where we're sitting, it all looks like it's been not like plain sailing, but pretty smooth. Have there been any moments when you've thought, what am I doing? Why am I doing this?
With the writing, no, I mean, certainly, obviously, there are weeks when it goes better than others. But I kind of think, I don't know, I actually think a lot of the work you do, I mean, particularly because I've got really young children, so my time at my desk is very, very limited. But I think it does help you focus and it helps you concentrate. And I do think a lot of the work that a writer does isn't necessarily done as you're sitting at your computer typing. I think an awful lot of it is done when you're actually doing something else, when you're looking the other way. And usually I find that when there's a problem in the book, the best thing to do is to walk away for a bit. And I think often the most sort of, the kind of problem solving in the plot or even at some micro level will happen when you're not thinking about it. And actually one of the things I found with this book, I'd pretty much finished the whole manuscript and I was reading it through for the last time and I noticed that I'd used the word penumbra twice, and I thought, you can't use a word like penumbra twice in a novel. It's just not right. It's one of those words that's so unusual you can only use it maximum of once, so even in a 500-page book. And so I spent weeks thinking, what's a good synonym for penumbra? I was really obsessing over it. And my husband would look at me and he'd say, you're thinking about penumbra again, aren't you? And I say, yes, I am still, I can't get the right one. And I kept, thinking, meniscus, no, that's not right. No, not quite right. Shadow, no. Halo, no. And it was really, really getting to me. And then there was one night when one of my kids was sitting, they were literally vomited all over their bed. I'm sorry about this. And so I got up and I was scraping the sheets. And I suddenly had this thought. I thought, Corona. I thought, yes, got it. I was so happy. I was thinking, and I shoved it all in the washing machine, thinking, that's such a relief. I thought I must write it down because I'm going to go back to sleep now and I might forget. So I did wake up and I had this really slightly smelly note actually saying Corona. And I did a kind of, okay, got it, and I had to burn it. So you see, the best ideas come even when you're scraping vomit off a sheet.
It really irritates me the way women with children are always asked how they manage to balance their work and their children, and men never are. However,
that said,
only a quick one. I mean, you and Will are both writers. You both work from home.
Yeah.
So how do you balance? Because I'm just going to assume that he's a great guy who does half of everything.
No.
So if one of them yells, who goes?
That'll be me. Yeah.
Oh, that's so disappointing.
Yeah. Well, no, he does. I mean, I'm not saying he's a patriarch who sits in his study smoking a pipe. No, nothing like that. Yeah. But it's not. I mean, it's not exactly 50-50. But it's actually probably because it's probably more because I want to. Actually, I mean, I love my kids and I feel enormously privileged to be their mum, and I want to spend as much time with them as I physically can. While they're little, because it's such a short gap of time, that they are dependent on you and they need you like that. So it is. I mean, it's tricky, but I don't think it's any harder actually than any woman who happens to be a mother and works. I don't think, and in many ways it's actually a lot easier because I get to be at home with them, and even if somebody else is looking after them, I'm there and they know my study door is open and they can come in. So I've never had to do that, the really stressful nursery drop and then rushing to the office, and I think that's hard. That's really hard to do that.
That's switching your head from kid to work.
And also the kind of, if you're in a meeting and someone says, your kid's fallen off the climbing frame, I mean, that's tough. That's the stressful bit, and I don't have to do that. I mean, I can be in the middle of a sentence and someone say my kid's fallen off, but that means I can down tools and I can go and do that when you're your own boss. But so it's not, I mean, there's an awful lot of juggling and compromise, and, there are some times when I have actually stuck a lolly in my kid's mouth and said, just 2 minutes, okay, I'm coming. typing. Yeah. Like I'm sure lots of mothers do, but...
Yeah, CBBS.
There's a bit of that. I do have a little tiny kids' desk next to my desk, which is filled with pens and crayons and paper, and they know that if I'm if I say to them 2 minutes, they will sit down and do a little drawing. So they know.
How well
I know that they
behaved.
can do that.
Yeah.
Well, that's an idealised version of that scenario.
Has that made you more disciplined? I mean, are you like, I sit down and do X thousand words a day type writer?
I don't know if I'd use the word discipline. I mean, I have to be disciplined to, I don't know, tidy the house and do the washing up. That I have to be disciplined, but I never had to be disciplined to write. I mean, I think if you know, your time is so limited, especially if you've got really, tiny preschool kids. And I wrote this basically between my daughter being born and her. She's now just almost 4, so she's just started kindergarten. So I think you do. I mean, I think you just make the most of it. There's no faffing about, and you just, if you have, if she goes down to her, if she was in her cot for an hour, she was a great sleeper, which the other 2 were not, I have to say. So I felt very blessed by her. She was one of those babies I'd put her in a cot and I think, she's fallen asleep. Just like all the books said they would. I tipped her away. So yeah, the book is, as long as it is, because my daughter was a good sleeper. So I think you do rush to your desk and there's nothing, and I think it's very important to develop the skill of walking past all the piles of laundry and thinking, I'm not going to do that now, I'm going to go and write. I think you have to make the most of any time you have.
Yeah, whereas most freelancers have the emptiest washing baskets in the country. And I'll just do that before I do.
Yeah, there's no I think
else.
If you've got young kids and you need to write, you'll just do it. I think you'll find the time somehow. The book will come.
To go back to the book, it's written from so many different perspectives, isn't it? Like, so the catalogue from her vile assistant and Niall and oh gosh, I've forgotten her name, Phoebe, Dan's daughter. How did you find that writing is switching between so many different characters?
I really liked it actually. It's quite interesting inhabiting lots of different people. So I went from writing, a middle-aged American man to, then I go back to Claudette's very early 20s when she arrives in London and she kind of gets sort of almost sucked accidentally into the film world. And then I was writing in the head of a 17-year-old American high school student, and it was. I really enjoyed it actually. I think it's, in a way, I think, as I was saying, I love my kids, but I don't think I'm constitutionally adapted to the very kind of cyclical domestic life that being with children requires. There's a lot of picking up at school, dropping at school, dinners, and I'm quite a restless person. So I actually think this book was a way, for me in a way, it was a reaction to that. It was a way for me to cope with that. So I could sort of travel and be different people in my imaginative life while living this quite regular domestic life in reality. So in a way, it was a kind of counterbalance.
Location's quite a big character in all your books, actually, but in this book, it's, the West Coast, the East Coast, London, the West Coast of Ireland, India, Scandinavia. You've been to all those places? I
have actually, yeah. I mean, I do a lot of travel writing for the Times, so this is why I get to go to these exciting places. And I was in the Stockholm archipelago, it's about 3 years ago, and I kept trying to write the scene where Claudette actually disappears, where she makes her escape. And I went on holiday. I was travelling in the Stockholm archipelago. So Stockholm is this huge city, and it's got this amazing, about half an hour out you get to these islands, and it's like being in the middle of nowhere. It's an incredible city, having this archipelago. And for some reason, my youngest child got this weird sort of, it was like jet lag. She got sort of Swedish jet lag. She kept waking up at 4 a.m. So every morning we'd all been sleeping in this room. So one of us, my husband and I, would remove this very wakeful, bouncy child, and so the other 2 would stay sleeping, and we'd end up either trudging around Stockholm or, in the middle of nowhere. So there was one morning when I was pushing her in her pushchair around this completely deserted, tiny little island, and she did actually fall asleep at one point. So I decided, I parked a buggy on the beach and I went for a swim, and I was swimming through this completely deserted bay, and I was just swimming along, and I thought, this is where she disappears. This is it. Because there was nobody about. It was incredible hush and this very sort of brackish water. And I thought, okay, that's it. I found the place. This must be the place. That's what I thought.
Yeah. Have you ever been tempted to do a Claudette?
I think we all have. Don't you think? I think everybody at some point wishes they could. Or it's like a fantasy that you have, I think, that there's always that option that if life gets too much, you could exit. I think everybody does. I certainly have at times.
Yeah, definitely. What next?
Well, actually, I'm not a superstitious person, but I'm very superstitious at talking about things I haven't written yet. So I have started something, but I don't know, I always feel if I talk about it, it'll sort of remove the urge to write it, or the... So actually, I know, a really annoying answer, isn't it?
Really annoying, yeah.
Sorry.
On that really annoying note, someone else can ask some questions?
Well, I read a lot as a child, actually. I was ill with encephalitis when I was 8, so I spent about a year or 2 years in bed. So basically all I did was read, which was a very good training ground to be a writer. So I had a kind of shelf of books next to my bed, and I would literally read from one side of the book and then I would start again at the other. And I think that's actually when I started thinking about what works actually as a book, because I think rereading is a very important thing as a writer. And I know that I would reread The Secret Garden and The Moomins and Joan Aitken. I always loved Joan Aitken's Wolves of Willoughby Chase. And I would reread and read until I actually knew them almost off by heart. And even then I remember thinking, why is this scene, I mean, I didn't probably think about it in this terms, but why is this scene good? Why does it work? Why does it change? You know, this scene starts with one person's thoughts and then it switches into another. And I do remember thinking about that as a child. I mean, I think I would say that all fiction is a real patchwork and mishmash of lots of different forms of inspiration, and some of it you probably draw from life, and some of it you make up, and some of it you actually steal, and that is true of all writers, so don't ever tell a writer anything because they will use it. And I think, you know, it's actually once you've sort of recast it and rewritten it and redrafted it and relocated it, it does, even if it is based on something that happened to you, it feels so different and so removed that it does feel disconnected from you. Well, I think the way to get to know them is to write about them, actually. I think often you can feel a way. I always feel in the first draft, actually, which I suppose is when you're getting to develop your characters. It's a bit like walking into a blizzard. You've no idea what's ahead of you, but you just have to keep pressing on. And often you'll come across objects and pathways that surprise you. So I think you just have to do it. I really believe in the kind of sense of security you get from word count. I think you don't always have to. I think the important thing is to get it down, just to do it. I think the more you sit there thinking, you know, I mean, I've heard creative writing tutors saying, you know, you need to, what would your character have in its pocket, and you can't start writing until you know. And I think that's actually nonsense. I think write it, and then if you need to know what's in the pocket, you'll find out. You'll think of something. You know, I think you just have to. I always think don't overthink it, and don't always think you have to begin at the beginning. You can begin at the end, you can begin in the middle, and then you can always go back and fill in the gaps. Don't worry too much. I think the key thing is not to worry too much before you start writing. Just start. Thank you.